I'd like to talk a few minutes about Doc Reinhardt and my own experience with him. So, as I said previously, I went to him when I was 14, and I mentioned that I took the first lesson was an orientation. That was what he called it with, and I took a lesson with someone else, and then so he analyzed both myself and the other student trumpet player that was in there, and discussed how we set up the play and things like that. His his method of describing and analyzing what a brass embouchure does, he calls it the pivot system. And of course, I didn't know all this upon the first lesson. He had like his he called it his encyclopedia of the pivot system, where he broke everything down and had drawings and sketches and things like that. And he had other other methods. A book called Conconi Studies, which was kind of like a lot of different long tone types of things, a little bit similar to exercises that this. I didn't know this at the time, but there's an embouchure teacher in New York at the same time. Like I said, I hadn't met yet, but his name was Carmine Caruso, and he had a lot of studies with long tones and things like that. So this Reinhardt book, the Conconi Studies, Doc seemed like he was a very jovial guy. He seemed kind of old then. I guess I was 14. He could have been let's say 60, in his 60s. Smoke a cigar. He had a PhD from somebody, so he was kind of scholarly. Okay, so I talked about the pivot, the encyclopedia of the pivot system. Well, in his office, he had all kinds of, handouts and printouts. Well, of course, this was in the era of typing, and I suppose, I don't even think the Xerox machine had been invented yet. So mimeograph, I guess, was possibly the method of copying, or stuff that he had published, that would actually be printed. So then when you're taking your lesson, I mean, he could be sitting there typing the whole time, typing more stuff out for you, like analyzing, the way he explained how you set up and what you did with your chops, and he'd be typing away. And then, you would take this home, out of the lesson. Of course, like for me, like I said, I'm going down on the train, so I'm reading all this stuff on the train on the way home. And I guess I acquired that pivot, the encyclopedia of the pivot system. I must have got that pretty soon. It was kind of a thick book, like maybe an inch thick or so. How many pages could that have been? I'm not sure. I don't recall. After we took that lesson, then I went back. And all the lessons after that were just myself. I'm not sure, like when the next time was I went back. I did not go and see him on a weekly basis through high school, several times a year, I suppose. So anyway, this didn't happen in the first lesson. And like I said, after I got some of the materials like his encyclopedia and all that, then then I became more familiar with his analysis of things. Basically, see if I can just kind of simplify through this. He had different types. In other words, this was based on how he analyzed your bone structure, your jaw structure, and everything. And most people have a natural overbite. I did. This is your teeth here. These are your bottom teeth. This is your top teeth. So, the horns here. In other words, I had a natural overbite, not a drastic one, but like I say, fairly normal. Now, some people have a natural underbite like this, or their teeth, could be perfectly lined up. And then there's also the consideration as if your teeth are not exactly even. Trying to get in the camera here. If you got one tooth that's a little bit forward of the one next to it or whatever, this is all going to affect how the mouthpiece lands on your face. So he had like terminology. I guess this is the first time I heard the terminology upstream and downstream. So if I remember correctly, like in other words, he'd have Roman numeral 1A, Roman numeral 1B. These are different types. I don't even remember exactly which is which. On trumpet now, I think I was set up like the jaw, like my jaw's receded now. There's like this overbite, and so the horns kind of pointed down, and you know I would sit kind of low on the top lip, like maybe more of the mouthpiece down on the bottom lip than on the top. And I don't know if he called that upstream or downstream. What does upstream and downstream mean? Well, first of all, I have found out since then that those terms mean different things to different people. So that can get confusing. That's like chord symbols, how, you know, chord notation doesn't always, that can even be regional sometimes. So the same thing with upstream, downstream. Some people think that to them, upstream means like your bell is pointed, up like this. And then if your bell is pointed down like this, they might call that downstream. What Reinhardt, the way he explained it, is where, like, in other words, when you're blowing air into the cup, I'll show it on a trombone mouthpiece. When you're blowing air into the mouthpiece, going, past your lips, is the air hitting, like if it's hitting the upper side, like above the throat hole, if it's hitting up in the top, he's going to call that upstream. And if it's hitting down in the bottom half, he would call that downstream. And this, of course, this also part of this determination is how high, up and down, north and south, the mouthpiece sits. Now, I think he called me even though I had the bell pointing down. I think since the mouthpiece sat, more on the bottom lip than on the top, I think he called me an upstream player, even though I wasn't pointed up this way so much. Then, now I had been playing baritone horn off and on, through junior high school and everything anyway, because the reason I bring that up is that this didn't happen on the first lesson, but maybe on the second lesson. Okay, this is trumpet, second or third lesson. With all this stuff, the way I was set up, I also kind of screw them. There was some kind of a twisting thing going on, and I would kind of have to screw the mouthpiece in and twist it into my chops. And so Reinhardt said I should switch to trombone for 6 months, and that the trombone mouthpiece, being a larger diameter, would get outside of, this twisting stuff that was happening inside the trumpet mouthpiece. And so, so that was the plan of attack. And so I guess, like I didn't have a trombone yet, a baritone horn or something, I might borrow it from school. So maybe he had a trombone there or something. He had these plastic mouthpieces too. That was another thing. I never bought one. So there were there were all kinds of mouthpieces and stuff. He had clear plastic so that when you played, he could look through the mouthpiece and say that he saw your lips doing this and doing that, and maybe even the air going upstream or downstream or whatever. Like I said, maybe this is my second lesson or no more than third lesson. He said, he recommended that I switch to trombone temporarily, for 6 months as sort of a corrective procedure. And, that kind of rocked my boat a little bit, but I thought, well, if he's the expert and that's what he recommends, I'll do that. I was playing baritone horn already, and I wanted to play trumpet, but if I'll give trombone a try. And he said, of course, and in the process of this, you're going to learn the trombone positions and all that, and you're going to learn bass clef. So okay, I was okay with that idea, even though I wanted to play trumpet, but okay, so so we go on this corrective procedure now. Now, if I remember correctly, and I might be off on this, so whatever he said on trumpet, the way he described upstream in my case, now on trombone, he said that I set up higher, more on the top lip than on the bottom lip, and now that made me a downstream player on trombone. And and I'm saying, well, if you say so, of course, going home and looking in the mirror and things like that. Of course, and that's another thing too. This is the first time that anybody got into the analysis of how does all this stuff work, and and I had an analytical, mechanical mind anyway, so I was okay with all that. So anyway, so that's where this is, like I said, maybe February of 1965, and now I'm turning into a trombone player temporarily. Another reason why this happened was when I played baritone, because one of my teachers in junior high school, one of the private teachers, that was a move that he made too. Like, why don't you play baritone some of the time, and maybe that'll help fix things or whatever. So back to the point being that by the time I got to Reinhardt and he's telling me to switch to trombone, I'm thinking, well, okay, I'll do it. And also, I didn't have these problems on trombone, at least at that point. I had problems later on, but not then. So once I got the trombone going, I dived headfirst into that and learned the slide positions and everything. My parents had to rustle up, you find a cheap old trombone, which turned out my junior high school band director at the time, he had it was like $15, this old Holton that didn't even have a slide lock or a bell lock on it or anything. But that was my new trombone for the time being, and I got started on that. And so, like I said, this is the second half of ninth grade, and it all went pretty smoothly from that point on. After not too long a time, I don't know, a couple months or whatever, I got a better horn. I think it was a Selmer Bundy, which was a student model horn, but it was new, and for a student horn, that was a good horn at the time anyway. So that became my horn. Actually, it didn't take too long that I got a more professional horn. Come to think of it, I got a Selmer Bolero, I guess before I got out of college. I guess that's when that was, because that's the horn I had going into college. So, like I said, I don't remember exactly when I got the Selmer Bolero, but at least that was now like a pro line horn. That's the horn I auditioned for after 3 years on trombone. By the time 3 years, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, and then during my senior year in high school is when I auditioned for college, spring of 1968, and got accepted down to Philadelphia Musical Academy and started in there in September. Now, other than Reinhardt, I didn't have any other trombone teachers at all through high school. So, as far as learning the slide and all that, I was pretty much self-taught at that point. Reinhardt did expose me to some of the trombone study literature at the time, like some of the Rousseau etudes and the Blazevich sequences, those are crazy things with all kinds of weird time signatures and things like that. And also, he had me doing stuff. Both of those books, especially the Blazevich books, also have all kinds of clef changes going on. So that was my exposure to alto clef and tenor clef. And like I said, all that kind of stuff, I didn't have too much trouble. I could learn that stuff and get comfortable with it, pretty easily. It was always the embouchure thing that was the stumbling block. And now that I was switched to trombone, things started to come around for my chops. I got accepted to Philadelphia Musical Academy and started September 1968 as a freshman there, majoring in trombone. I wanted to try to double major on composition and trombone, and it wouldn't let me do it. So I picked the trombone to major in. And my teacher became Glenn Dotson, who had just moved to Philadelphia to take over the principal trombone chair in the Philly orchestra. Glenn was new to town. I had never heard of him. I knew different, Stan Kenton named trombone players and stuff like that, but I didn't know anybody in the classical world. That ended up being a very good thing.